Waiting again. She stood waiting again, knowing he would come this way. Dear God, how many times has she stood waiting? She was weary. He always rolled his eyes upon seeing her and then looked away, scanning for any distraction. The scene would play out again, like it had so many times before. She would have her say, but he, like a stone wall, was unmoved, utterly indifferent to her. How long could she keep doing this? Oh God. Every day now her life was an acted out prayer. The stone wall, though, never moved. There was no other option for her. In her heart there was no room for questions, no room for doubt. She had to be there. She had no choice but to wait. Her husband had passed. Her brother was gone. Her only boy had died a few years ago. So who would speak for her? No one. And her town did things the old way. Without her husband, her brother, or son, she was not respected, seemingly without a voice. That's what everyone thought, that pathetic woman. She might as well have been shouting against the wind, but at least she shouted. So she prayed and waited and kept pleading with the judge. This was all she could do. It would be for her, as Simone de Beauvoir bemoans, man is defined as a human being and woman as a female. Whenever she behaves as a human being, she is said to imitate the male. The widow's routine played out over and again, the persistent meeting the unmovable, until inexplicably one day her prayers were answered. The judge relented, indifference yielded, and justice cracked and crumbled. Her case was heard, truly heard, and even more heeded. Justice emerged, but it was more than that. Her pleadings, tears, prayers, and faith were vindicated. Injustice had imprisoned her as a social pariah, but to her it was torture. For her, justice was more than financial empowerment. It was peace. It was dignity. This godless judge relented at last after so many prayers, so that finally God's justice, God's concern for the widows and the orphans, won. Persistent prayer overcomes evil. A few years ago, I was preparing the eulogy for my grandmother's funeral. She had lived 99 years, nearly 100, from 1915 to 2014. I tried to imagine what she had witnessed over a span of time, a time which saw so much change. One particular thing leaped out at me from among the many monumental events such as 2 world wars, the Great Depression, scores of technological innovations, advances in communications and travel, and countless cultural revolutions. This one thing startled me. In 1920, when she was 5 years old, the 19th Amendment to our Constitution was passed, giving women access to the vote. My grandmother, as a little child, had witnessed the persistence and prayer of so many women, and the combination of labor and determination overcame an unmovable rock of injustice. It was by considering this landmark development through her single lifespan that altered my perspective on our democracy. She had seen the lives of millions of adult Americans who had been denied the most foundational aspect of justice. She observed women who, for the first time in their lives, felt a sense of personal liberty, and who felt, finally, that they too had a legitimate voice in civic matters. This new perspective came to me at a point in my life, well into my career as a professor. The shift in American political reality that my grandmother had known firsthand was abjectly foreign to me. I had long known many amazing female scholars and effective administrators. I had known remarkable women in my own family, not least my mother, my wife, and my daughters. Trying to imagine these women living without political standing, equal political standing, sounds preposterous. Having the 19th Amendment ratified in 1920 was the result of decades of demonstration, protests, and waiting for justice. Not just here in the U.S. Suffrage for women was gained in the UK in 1918, and it swept across Europe and the Americas. Like a slow-moving wave, democracies gradually opened up to women in the Western Hemisphere over the next 25 years. Under the surface of these changes were protracted debates, begrudging use of loopholes, stubborn repeals, and new levels of discrimination based on education, race, marital status, and other factors that we know to be extraneous to inherent dignity and voice. Just in our hemisphere, predominantly in the north, hundreds of millions of women prayed persistently for God to change the hearts of unmovable, indifferent governments. Standing where we are now, the struggles of the suffragettes feel so remote, so foreign to our way of thinking, because of our collective observations of women over the last 105 years. Observations of women in every academic field and in every industry. Openings in education have meant that over time, now in 2025, this year 62% of college and university freshmen are women. Many of the prayers have been answered because, as you know, access to education is crucial for the personal enrichment and the empowerment of women. And yet there remain many reminders that full justice for women has not yet become a reality. One such area that still requires women's persistent search for justice, ironically, is in the church itself. For example, the Church of Rwanda announced this week, their resolve to secede from the Anglican Communion, of which we are a part, with the Church of England, because of the recent designation of Bishop Sarah Mulally as the next Archbishop of Canterbury. Her formal concentration will not be until March of 2026, and yet the fallout has begun because of her gender. It seems likely that other member churches will follow, such as the churches of Nigeria or Uganda. The Anglican churches of Alexandria, Egypt, and Chile could also follow suit. Women thus continue, persistently so, praying to God to move the unmoved in different hearts of these church leaders. When Bishop Sarah Mulally becomes the next Archbishop of Canterbury, she will fill the vacancy left by the resignation of Justin Welby. Welby resigned because of his inaction against abusive priests in his diocese. Somehow the Church of Rwanda found it less offensive to support a bishop who overlooked abuse than the rise of a woman to the same post. I wonder aloud with you this morning, how many times in the next few years will Bishop Mulally seek God in prayer so that she does not lose heart, as Jesus commanded us? We don't have to look as far away as the UK or Rwanda to find the same unmoved, indifferent responses to women's prayers. Presiding Bishop Catherine Jeffords Shorey, our church's first female presiding bishop, was snubbed in her trip to Tanzania in 2007 when several of these same archbishops refused to accept Eucharist alongside Bishop Shorey. They refused her that basic Christian rite of communion during sacred table fellowship. It was also early in her role as presiding bishop that a swath of Episcopal churches seceded to start a new church, the Anglican Church of North America, sometimes referred to as ACNA. I know that Bishop Shorey endured malicious slander about her character, even denials that she was a Christian. Need we wonder how many times Bishop Shorey followed Jesus' teaching to pray always, as to not lose heart? Our own assistant bishop, Geraldine Wolfe, has spoken about her struggles against unjust treatment for being a female clergy. Geraldine was a simple vicar at an inner city parish of Philadelphia when she was called to be the dean of the cathedral in Kentucky. She thus became the very first dean in the entire Anglican Communion. She tells us that it was a rewarding time of her ministry, although the Canadian religious publication, the Canadian Churchman, ran a cartoon portraying a Canadian bishop standing high on a ledge, ready to throw himself down because a woman had become a dean. She tells stories of her work as Bishop of Rhode Island, where several male priests notified her in no uncertain terms that she was not welcomed at their parishes. A bishop forbidden to visit her own parishes? Hearing her recount these stories with no bitterness is clear evidence, though, that through persistent prayer, Bishop Wolfe never lost heart. An amazing model of Christ's love we have in our very own bishop. There have been some deeply rooted seeds in church history against women, even godly women. Catholic scholar Joseph Fitzmyer records in his commentary on Romans that Paul's greetings to Andronicus and Junia in chapter 16 of that letter for centuries had been obscured. In the 11th century, a monk changed Junia's name to Junius, changing the name's gender from female to male. If you pick up an RSV, that is a Revised Standard Version Bible, you will find, as the monk intended, Junius. It wasn't until 1989 that the NRSV, the New Revised Standard Version, returned the text to Junia. Why does it matter that it's Junia, a woman, rather than Junius, a man? Because St. Paul called Junia an apostle. Junia, like Paul and Peter, was an apostle of the church. But for 8 centuries, through times of women fighting the rights to vote in civic elections, and through debates and struggles about women's ordination, both Andronicus and Junia were reckoned as males. For 8 centuries, the church lost the vision and authenticity of a female apostle. How many women in these 8 centuries knelt and prayed to God for their hearts? How many women would have served the church faithfully in Jesus' steps, in Paul's, and in the steps of Junia, if they had been given the chance? I think when we first pick up the parable of the persistent widow, where we find Jesus' words to pray always and not lose heart, we think of ourselves as the widow who persistently approaches a judge. But it leaves us with a warped association between God and an unjust judge. We are prone to ignore that twice the text warns us not to, for the judge neither fears God nor respects humans. He, the judge, would be the cause for us to lose heart. In Jesus' day, however, a clear, very near analog to the judge would have been Rome, would have been Pilate and the like. They would be the natural association to the unjust judge. This parable, as well as the soon-to-arrive stories of Jesus' trial and death, are a reminder to us that we must always pray to God and not lose heart. I believe we are to stand in solidarity with the widow and with others who would suffer similar struggles for justice. Today we stand with Bishop Wolfe, Bishop Shorey, and particularly with Bishop Mulally, sending prayers to God so that they do not, and so that we do not lose heart. Tomorrow we may need to stand with others who persistently seek justice from unmovable, indifferent powers. Jesus knew firsthand what it was like to stand in such a place. And many of his followers have resisted unjust power with resistance and prayer. With God's help, may we always remember the brave saints of our church, including Junia, and our brave female bishops. Together, may we always pray and not lose heart. Amen.